staying strong in Burundi today on The World. I'm Marco Werman. Repression and violence are on the rise again in Burundi. This activist tells her kids,
your country and your values, your principles, your beliefs are stronger than the fear that you feel.
The region's seen trouble like this before, and the U.S. ambassador to the UN wants to make sure it doesn't happen again.
We can't say it is a genocide, but I don't think that one would be exaggerating the crisis on the ground by saying that we worry that history could repeat itself in Burundi.
Plus, why Europe has only itself to blame for letting the U.S. dictate policy on Syria.
They themselves have laid down willingly under the bus and allowed the Americans to drive the bus over them quite a few number of times.
Those stories and more today on The World. We're going to kick things off today in a country we don't often go to. On a map of Africa, Burundi is a little hard to find if you don't know where it is. But our first two guests know the Central African country very well and are seriously worried about what's going on there.
You almost want to hold the globe and shake it and say, look at what's happening.
That's Burundian poet Keti Nivyabandi. She led all-women protests through the streets of the capital Bujumbura last spring. We'll hear more from her and why she's so angry in a few minutes. One of the reasons has to do with something Amnesty International revealed today. Satellite images that seem to show 5 new mass graves near the capital. If confirmed, they're likely the result of fighting there since April. That's when Burundi's president announced he would run for a third term, ignoring a constitution that barred him from doing so. Our first guest is the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power. She was in Burundi last week and had her own brush with government officials. When she tried to talk with reporters at Bujumbura's airport, officials tried to push them apart. You can see her on YouTube telling them, "Don't touch me, I'm talking to the press. I can do what I want." And she did.
Held a press conference, but I think we also got a window into some of the darker tendencies that exist in that country and with the government right now.
Those darker tendencies have created a climate of fear in Burundi that Ambassador Power describes as acute.
What you have so far are hundreds of people who have been killed, people in Bujumbura, the capital, waking up most mornings and seeing bodies in the streets, 240,000 refugees who have fled to neighboring countries, and a climate of widespread fear that the crisis could escalate and that a match could be laid down, lighting up whole communities that so far have stayed peaceful. One of the reasons that the international community and the African Union are so seized with the challenges in Burundi right now is because we know the history and we see things escalating and not de-escalating, and we see people becoming more fearful, and people in the part of government militias, but also in some in the opposition, becoming better armed, and that does not bode well. So we can't say it is a genocide, but I don't think that one would be exaggerating the crisis on the ground by saying that we worry that history could repeat itself in Burundi.
There have been lots of allegations that neighboring Rwanda is training and supporting opponents of Burundi's government. Did you see any evidence of that?
Well, our mobility was restricted so much by the government that I cannot say that we had the kind of exhaustive look at the situation on the ground. But we believe the reports of Rwandan involvement are credible, and we have exerted public and private pressure on Rwanda to do nothing to further destabilize a situation that really could get out of hand in a hurry.
Well, you tried to follow up, I gather, with activists and others you'd met on a previous trip to Burundi. What did you learn about these people?
Just looking at the list of journalists, human rights defenders, women's rights activists, lawyers, etc., that I had met with on my first trip in my current job in April of 2014 versus now, a year and a half later. And when I went down the list, basically next to each of the names of the individuals I'd met, it was a stark catalog of how much the situation had deteriorated. So next to one name, it would say fled, the next one fled, the third one in hiding, the fourth one in Burundi, but not at the meeting, too scared to come to the meeting, the fifth one shot. Pierre Claver Mbomina, one of the great human rights defenders in Burundi, was shot in the throat and in the face and is recovering in Brussels. It is not just what civil society said or didn't say to the UN Security Council when we visited, but what is left of civil society, and do they even feel free to come forward and engage with the international community in order to share their concerns? And the answer is, by and large, not.
I mean, given the number of crises that the UN seems unable to